Most men don't leave because they believe staying is what strength looks like, and that belief quietly destroys them. I've been thinking about the way strength is usually defined for men, because when people say a man is strong, what they're often describing is someone who can endure a lot, someone who doesn't complain, someone who absorbs pressure without reacting to it, someone who stays, even when staying is difficult. And for a long time, that definition made sense. But the more you sit with it, the more something about it starts to feel off. Because endurance and strength aren't the same thing. Endurance is the ability to tolerate, to remain in place, to withstand. Strength is something more deliberate than that. And I think this is where a lot of men get misled. They're taught directly or indirectly that leaving is a form of failure, that walking away means they couldn't handle it, that if they were stronger, they would have stayed and made it work. So they stay, not always because it's right, but because leaving feels like losing. What's interesting is that belief creates a very quiet kind of damage, because when someone remains in a situation that consistently diminishes them, something begins to shift internally. Not all at once, not in a dramatic way. It's gradual. They begin to adjust to what they once wouldn't have accepted. Their expectations lower. Their voice softens. Their presence changes. And eventually, what once felt wrong starts to feel familiar. And familiarity can be dangerous because it can disguise itself as stability. From the outside, it might even look like strength. He's still there. He's still handling everything. He's not reacting. But internally, there's a cost to that. And it's not always obvious. It doesn't always look like collapse. Sometimes it looks like quiet disconnection, a kind of distance from yourself. Because when you stay in a situation that doesn't reflect your value, you're forced to either confront it or adapt to it. And many men choose to adapt. They convince themselves it's not that bad, that it's temporary, that it will improve, or that this is simply what life requires of them. But at some point, a different question starts to surface. Not, can I handle this? But why am I continuing to accept this? And that question changes everything, because it shifts the focus away from endurance towards self-respect. And self-respect doesn't operate the same way endurance does. It doesn't measure how much you carry. It pays attention to what you're allowing. And once you start looking at it that way, staying begins to feel different. Not admirable, but costly. And that's where the definition of strength starts to change. Because there comes a point where the question isn't whether something can be endured, it's whether it should be. And that distinction matters more than most men realize. Because when something is no longer contributing to who you are, when it's no longer building you, challenging you in the right ways, or moving your life forward, it doesn't just remain neutral. It begins to work in the opposite direction. Not loudly, not all at once, but steadily. And living in that space where something is quietly taking more than it's giving is not a sustainable way for a man to exist. At some point, the decision has to shift from, how much can I handle, to, is this still worth carrying? And choosing to step away from something that no longer serves your life isn't avoidance, it's alignment. Strength is no longer about how long you can remain in a situation. It becomes about clarity, about recognizing when something is no longer building you, when it's no longer aligned with who you are, and responding to that honestly. And honesty can be uncomfortable, because it often requires you to let go of something you've invested in. Time, energy, identity. which is why leaving is so difficult. Not because it's weakness, but because it requires a different kind of strength, the kind that isn't about proving anything to anyone else, the kind that is quiet, internal, unseen, the kind that says, "This is no longer right for me," and then acts on it, without needing validation, without needing agreement. And I think that's the part that gets overlooked, because it doesn't look dramatic, it doesn't draw attention, it doesn't always make sense to other people, but it restores something. It restores alignment. It restores clarity. It restores a sense of self that often gets lost when someone stays too long in the wrong place with the wrong person. A man can love someone deeply and still recognize that they are not good for his life. And maybe that's what strength actually is. Not endurance, not tolerance, not the ability to remain no matter what, but the ability to recognize when something is no longer right and have the discipline to step away from it. Because if staying is slowly costing you who you are, then it's how a man quietly becomes someone he was never meant to be. And walking away isn't weakness. It's the clearest expression of strength a man can have, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. And what's rarely talked about is what happens after that decision is made, because walking away doesn't instantly feel like relief. It can feel quiet, empty even. There's no noise. There's no constant tension. No pressure to keep adjusting yourself. And for a lot of men, that silence can feel unfamiliar. Because when you've spent a long time adapting to something, you get used to the weight of it. You get used to carrying it. You get used to waking up and navigating around it. So when it's gone, there's a space where it used to be. And that space can feel uncomfortable at first. But that discomfort isn't a sign that you've made the wrong decision. It's a sign that something finally stopped taking from you. And now there's room again. Room to think clearly. Room to move differently. Room to rebuild parts of yourself that had been set aside. And that process doesn't happen all at once either. It happens the same way the damage did, gradually. But this time, in the other direction. You start to recognize yourself again. Your voice feels more natural. Your decisions feel more aligned. And the things you once tolerated no longer feel acceptable. Not because you became someone else, but because you returned to who you were before you started compromising yourself to stay. And maybe that's the part that matters most. Not just the decision to leave, but what that decision makes possible for you afterward.